And we'd like to welcome here Ms. Komal Bukhanwala to please speak about the topic, plant nutrition for preparing agriculture for 2030. Good evening, ma'am. Let's give her a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening. Namaskar to all of you. Welcome again. Thank you, Ray Consulting and Raj Kumarji again for organizing a splendid and a spectacular event. We had a very interesting panel discussion to start with, and I think it's a burning issue that's facing agriculture, not only in India, but globally. So I think when you talk about climate resilience, one of the biggest challenges that we are all need to address in agriculture today is soil health. Agriculture in India today has achieved various milestones. We are the largest producers of fruits such as mango, banana, so on and so forth. Second largest producers of wheat and rice, and the green revolution has certainly helped us achieve this sort of food security. But we face three major challenges, one being degrading soil health, the second being climate change, and last but not the least, rampant malnutrition across the country. If you look at where we stand today in terms of soil health, globally, 40% of the soil in the world, the agricultural world, is degraded. In India, on December 5th, the Times published this article on soil health, where more than 33% of the country's soil has been degraded. This is largely due to excessive cultivation and an imbalanced nutritional practice and an excessive synthetic fertilizer practice. More than 50% of the soil in the country today is deficient in zinc. More than 50% of the soil in the country today has gone saline, which further compromises its productivity and does not provide adequate nutrition to the crops in terms of regular plant growth. If you look at our agricultural practice today, fertilizers were brought into the country in the early 1900s, and they definitely helped us achieve food security, but they largely ignored the impact they've had on our environment and on the quality of the food. Largely, the fertilizers have been subsidized, as we know today, for the three major nutrients, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But this subsidy has largely incentivized what we now understand to be is an imbalanced nutrition practice. The subsidy is the largest in the world today. It's $22 billion, equivalent to 180,000 crore rupees. It's the largest subsidy in the world, which is incentivizing the farmer to make available so-called fertilizer, which is actually creating an imbalance at the soil level. This is a paper published by ICAR, two ICAR research institutes, which have reported that the reason for the declining crop productivity as well as malnutrition is the excessive and imbalanced fertilizer practice and the sheer negligence of the other nutrients, whether they be secondary or micronutrients. If you look at the impact that the fertilizer use has created, this is a paper that has been put out in 2022 by ICAR, IISS, which is the Indian Institute of Soil Science, as well as the International Zinc Association. And it clearly talks about the excessive fertilizer practice that has been going on rampantly for the last 50 to 70 years, and clearly points out to a clear neglect towards the other nutrients, not allowing the plants to assimilate the other nutrients, causing soil degradation, contributing to climate change. One of our earlier panelists clearly talked about the need for the reduction of greenhouse gases. 65% of the N2O emissions that come out, that are produced in the world, come out of the agricultural practice, which is largely due to nitrogenous fertilizer. So the very practice that farmers have been adopting for a long time is actually causing a problem in terms of how they're actually going to be able to produce crops today. It's actually hurting the farmer at the very end of the day. It's the same practice that he adopts every single day, continues to hurt his future longer term. If you look at the impact of these emissions, 1 pound of N2O emission actually creates 265 times a greater impact in terms of climate change, in terms of temperature change versus 1 pound of CO2 emission. So it's a serious, serious concern that needs to be addressed. Not to mention the fact that this excessive practice has actually led into contamination in the soil, contamination across water bodies, creating algal blooms, which further create environmental toxins, which have a significant negative impact on animal as well as human health. Last but not the least, the paper talks about a very interesting point that while we are trying to have this sort of productivity through these fertilizers have actually not allowed the assimilation of nutrients from soils which carry other nutrients including zinc, iron, copper, boron, and so on and so forth. So a survey was carried out in Gujarat and Vadodara where soils were taken and soils carrying nutrients were used to produce fodder, and the fodder crop was found to was grown without the fertilizer practice. So this is a great challenge upon us because a fertilizer practice continues to thrive in the country, which is not allowing you to even produce nutritionally secure food. Last but not the least, if you look at the state of affairs, somebody mentioned earlier, how is nutrition in the country? We are in a state of crisis. When you look at the malnutrition figures, the country loses 28,000 crores in terms of GDP loss due to micronutrient deficiencies in the country. More than 80% of the country, the population suffers from one micronutrient deficiency, be it vitamin A, zinc, iron, folate, so on and so forth. More than 50% of the children in the country below the age of 5 are suffering due to stunting, and this largely comes from an inadequate availability of nutrients in their diets. This is present across not just the rural parts of the country, but across rural and urban parts of the country. A Bangalore newspaper, in fact, reports that 90% of school-going children today do not receive an adequate level of nutrition in their diet on a day-to-day basis. 73 to 80% of the Indian food is reported to be protein deficient, right? So this is a serious, these are serious alarming numbers in terms of the food that we produce, what we think we are getting nourished by, and need a serious look at in terms of intervention and practice. If you look at it all, you have degrading soil health, you've got an agricultural practice that has not been challenged in the longest time and requires serious intervention and disruption. And you have a serious threat and a serious challenge to address in terms of meeting the nutritional requirements of a growing population on a war footing, because it's impacting not only the young, but every single member out there, because you're talking about more than 80% of the Indian population. So if you take out the front 2 rows of this audience, you're talking about the rest of us here at present today. SML, formerly known as Sulphur Mills Limited. We're a 51-year-old group. We have been working actively in this space for the last 15 years. SML is present pan-India and works across 8 countries worldwide. We have 2 global R&D centers working in an integrated manner to provide an integrated solution through crop nutrition, biologicals, biostimulants, as well as crop protection to address a lot of these issues. Over 120 lakh acres have been treated through these solutions, and the lives of 30 lakh farmers have been impacted through these practices. What we envision for the future are smart farms. Somebody has mentioned earlier in the evening that we need to double the amount of land. We look at it as a challenge and saying we can actually farm, we need to farm on much lesser area of land with a higher productivity, with a higher quality, with a greater concern for the environment, so you do not create problems which need new interventions and solutions. And this would be the way India can leapfrog into the future and become the agricultural powerhouse for the world. In terms of interventions needed, there are several things. I think a lot has been talked about policy and the kind of policy changes that are needed to help us achieve this kind of rapid change, because these are age-old practices. One of them is clearly the awareness at the farmer level that needs to be addressed. Most farmers are not aware of balanced nutrition, and there is an age-old mindset that has been running in terms of what they consider to be fertilizer, or what they call khad in general, and they only restrict it to the two primary nutrients, which are nitrogen and phosphorus. The second part being the policies which are being developed or are in place need to be addressed in a rampant way to see that these subsidies are distributed to the likes of other nutrients and biofertilizers, which can not only impact yield but quality of the food and address sustainability on a much longer term. Last but not the least, equal GST for all nutrients, so the farmer is actually able to pay for this in a much better way. This can change the way the country produces food, the country's health at hand, and the future of our generation. And with this, I'd like to end this talk. Jai Hind, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.